My name is Ethan. I'm 36 years old, and I've worked as a wildlife photographer for more than a decade. Most of my life has been spent outdoors, hiking through forests, waiting in silence for hours, chasing that one perfect shot of a bear crossing a stream or an eagle diving through fog. People imagine that kind of solitude is peaceful. Sometimes it is. But there are moments when the silence itself starts to feel alive, like the world is listening back. After 3 exhausting weeks shooting in Wyoming, I needed a break. The photos on the listing showed a rustic little place surrounded by pines with a porch that faced the mountains. It looked perfect, remote, safe. I arrived on a cloudy afternoon. The gravel road wound through thick forest for miles before the trees opened up to reveal the cabin. A single-story structure with weathered logs and a tin roof that looked like it had survived decades of storms. There were no neighbors in sight, no power lines, no cell towers, just me, the forest, and a silence that felt almost too heavy. Rick had left the key under a flower pot by the door, just like he'd said. The lock was old, but worked fine. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Wood smoke, damp pine, and something faintly sweet, like resin or old soap. The cabin had one small living room with a fireplace, a cramped kitchen, a bedroom, and a short hallway leading to a bathroom and storage closet. I set my bags down and did a quick sweep of the place. Everything looked normal, but a few details caught my eye. On the kitchen table was a dark circular ring, a coffee cup stain that looked recent. The bed was made but slightly uneven, like someone had lain on it and pulled the blanket back up in a hurry. And in the bathroom, the towel on the rack smelled faintly like shampoo. None of it felt sinister, just odd. Maybe Rick had stayed there himself. Maybe I was overthinking it. I'd been alone too long. When that happens, your mind grabs onto details and won't let go. I unpacked my gear, took a quick shower, and made some instant noodles. I wanted quiet. I wanted the kind of silence you can hear breathing. That night, I climbed into bed and reached for my phone charger. But there was already one plugged into the wall beside the nightstand. Same model, same brand, same cable length. I froze, staring at it for a few seconds, then pulled it out to make sure it wasn't mine. It wasn't. Mine was still in my backpack. It was such a small thing, but it felt wrong. Like seeing your toothbrush already wet when you haven't used it yet. I told myself it must have been left behind by the previous guest. Still, I took it out of the socket, coiled it neatly, and left it on the table. Around 2:40-something a.m., I woke to a noise. Not thunder, not the wind. It sounded like something, or someone, moving in the kitchen. Wood creaked, a faint clink, like glass tapping metal. I held my breath and listened. Then silence again. Nothing. The cabin shifted and groaned the way old wood does in the cold. I told myself that was all it was. The temperature, the wind, maybe an animal brushing against the wall outside. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. Morning came grey and cold. I made coffee and noticed something off. The electric kettle ID used the night before wasn't where ID left it. It had been on the counter beside the sink. Now it sat on the table, its cord stretched tight. I stared at it for a long minute. Maybe I did, without thinking, but I couldn't remember. I texted Rick, "Hey, I found a phone charger here. Belonged to a previous guest? There shouldn't be anything left in there. Last guest checked out early August." That reply stuck with me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to brush it off and spent the rest of the day hiking nearby trails, photographing deer and eagles. The golden light near dusk in Montana is unreal, warm and thick, like honey poured over the mountains. For a while I forgot about the charger. When I got back, the sun had gone down, and the forest had turned into a black wall around the property. I stepped onto the porch and realized the back door, which I hadn't noticed before, was slightly open. It was tucked behind a curtain near the kitchen. I stood there staring at the gap. The wind pushed it open a little farther, hinges squealing softly. I closed it, slid the old bolt lock into place, and tried not to think about how it had been left that way. That night it rained hard, the kind of rain that sounds like static on the roof. I sat by the dying fire, scrolling through the day's photos. Every so often, I thought I heard something beyond the rain, a light scraping, maybe a branch rubbing against the wall. But it didn't sound random. It came and went, uneven, almost like footsteps circling the cabin. I got up and peeked through the window. Nothing but darkness, and my own reflection looking back at me. Still, I pulled the curtains shut and latched the window. I went to bed late. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy and still. I remember thinking that the silence afterward was worse than the storm. Sometime after 3 a.m., I woke again, this time not to a sound, but to a smell, metallic, wet, like rust and damp soil. It seeped down the hallway from the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. 3:18 a.m. The beam trembled slightly as I stepped into the hall. The cabin felt colder than before, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. That S when I saw it. A thin line of faint light spilling from the kitchen doorway. The back door was open again. Rain still dripped outside, the wind carrying in a soft hiss through the gap. The curtain swayed gently, brushing the wall. I walked forward, every step slow and deliberate. My pulse was so loud I could barely hear anything else. I pushed the door shut and threw the bolt back in place. That's when I noticed the footprints, muddy, dark, leading from the door to the middle of the kitchen floor. And then they stopped. No return prints, no smudge of someone turning around, just a single path of wet boot prints that ended right there, as if whoever made them had stood still for a moment and vanished. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, watching those muddy prints fade as they dried, the outlines cracking into faint brown ghosts on the wood. I kept thinking maybe I'd track them outside once the sun came up, see where they led. But when daylight finally pushed through the clouds, the ground beyond the door was clean. No prints, no trail, just wet pine needles and grey mud rippled by rain. I messaged Rick again. "Hey, someone's been inside. The back door was open, footprints on the floor." He didn't reply for almost 2 hours. When he did, it was short. "That can't be right. Nobody has the key except you and me." I stared at the screen, then typed back, "Then you better come check, man, because someone did." No response. I walked the perimeter of the cabin that morning, camera in hand like it could protect me. The forest was quiet in that hollow way that feels staged. Birds gone, branches motionless. Behind the cabin, I found an old woodpile and a rusted metal chair half buried in leaves. Nothing else. Still, the feeling that someone was nearby clung to me, like static you can't shake off. Inside, I tried to focus on editing photos. Around noon, I made lunch, turned on some old folk songs through my phone speaker, and pretended the world was normal. The act almost worked, until I noticed the closet door in the hallway was open about an inch. I was sure I'd closed it that morning. I walked over, slow. My reflection looked stretched in the narrow mirror beside it. I pulled the handle. Inside, cleaning supplies, a folded blanket, a bucket, nothing out of place. Yet the air inside the closet was colder, like it was connected to somewhere else. I shut it again, firmly this time, and jammed a chair under the knob. Childish, maybe, but it gave me something to control. That night, wind scraped against the eaves. I built a small fire, sat near it with a beer, and convinced myself I was fine. Around 10, I heard something faint, tapping inside the wall. 3 sharp knocks, then silence, then 2 more slower. I froze. Rodents, I thought. Or maybe pipes. The cabin was old. Noises were part of its body. I turned the music louder and ignored it. But later, lying in bed, I heard it again, this time behind the headboard. A hollow, careful rhythm, like someone testing the wood. I pressed my palm against the wall. Cold, still. I whispered into the dark, "Stop," and it did. I lay awake until sunrise. The next day I drove into town 30 minutes away just to be around people. I found a small diner, ordered pancakes and bad coffee, and felt the tension bleed out of me. I even laughed at something the waitress said. But when I checked my phone, I had a new voicemail. Unknown number. I press play. Static. Then a long exhale. Then my own voice. A recording I didn't remember making, saying, "You shouldn't have locked the door." The message ended with a soft scrape, like fabric dragging over wood. I deleted it immediately. I told myself it was some spam glitch, an accidental recording, anything but what it sounded like. I stayed in town longer than I needed to. When I finally headed back, the sky was turning orange and heavy with rain again. Pulling up to the cabin, I felt that same pressure in my chest, the kind you get before a storm or a confession. Everything looked exactly the same, until I unlocked the door. The chair I'd wedged under the closet handle was on the opposite side of the hall. The door stood wide open. Inside, the blanket was gone. I checked every room, shouting Rick's name even though I knew he wasn't there. Nothing. Every window was locked from the inside. The floor creaked under my boots like it was breathing. I sat down, shaking, trying to think. Then I noticed something new on the kitchen counter. A small glass jar. Inside, floating in cloudy water, was a dead moth. I hadn't seen it before. The jar lid was rusty but screwed tight. No note, no reason. I took it outside and threw it as far as I could into the trees. The sound of it shattering was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in days. That night, I stacked a chair under the front door too. Slept with a flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. I must have dozed off around 2 a.m. because I woke to a faint click. Not loud, just a metallic tick from somewhere near the hallway. The sound of a camera shutter. I sat up instantly. My own camera bag was on the table across the room. I walked over, checked it. Lens cap on, power off. The sound had come from the other side of the wall. And then I heard breathing, slow, measured, on the other side of the wooden panel separating the living room from the storage closet. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound faded after maybe 10 seconds, 10 seconds that stretched forever. When I finally opened the closet again, it was empty, but the floorboards inside looked different. The dust had been disturbed, a faint rectangular outline near the back where the boards didn't align perfectly. I crouched, ran my fingers along the edge, and felt a gap. I pried at it until one plank lifted, revealing a narrow space beneath, too small to crawl into, too deep to see clearly. The smell that came up was the same as before, rust and damp soil. I dropped the board back into place and covered it with the mop bucket. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I packed my gear and threw everything in the car. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally found a signal, I called Rick. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight. "Ethan, I was just about to call you. What the hell's going on in that cabin? Listen, don't go back there, all right? I'm heading up myself. You didn't tell me someone had been living there, because no one should be. The sheriff cleared it weeks ago." "Cleared what?" "Look, I'll explain later. Just don't..." The call cut off. No signal again. I drove another 10 miles before pulling over on a ridge where I could see the valley below. A dark smear of trees and the faint silver line of the river. I sat there until my breathing slowed, trying to convince myself that leaving was enough. But curiosity is poison. You tell yourself you're just going back for your tripod, or your charger, or closure. The truth is, you go back because you need the story to make sense. That evening I turned around. When the cabin came into view through the trees, the porch light was on. I hadn't left it that way. The sky was almost black by the time I parked again. The cabin's porch light glowed weakly through the drizzle, cutting a yellow triangle into the fog. I sat there with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the steady patter of rain on the windshield. I didn't want to go in. Every instinct said, leave it. But I couldn't. I needed to see what Rick meant. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, humid, like someone had been moving around recently. The smell of pine and smoke was heavier now, mixed with something sharp underneath, the same metallic tang that had woken me days earlier. "Rick!" I called out. No answer. I moved slowly, flashlight sweeping the floor. Everything looked like before, except for one detail. The kitchen table had been pushed about a foot to the left. Its legs scraped fresh marks into the floorboards, and next to it, resting neatly beside a chair, was the glass jar I'd thrown into the woods. The same cloudy water, the same dead moth inside. I felt my throat close. Someone had been here since I left. I went to the closet in the hallway. The chair I'd jammed under the handle was gone. The door stood open. I shined the light inside. Same mop bucket, same tools, but the floorboards at the back had been pried loose completely. The hole gaped open, a square of black. I crouched beside it. The air coming out was cold and wet, smelling of soil and old wood. The beam of my flashlight couldn't reach the bottom. It just faded into darkness, like a tunnel. For a long time, I just knelt there, breathing shallowly. I don't know what I expected to see. Bones, old boxes, anything that would make this make sense. But what I found was worse, precisely because it didn't explain anything. On the edge of the opening, nailed into the joist, was a small photograph, curled, water-stained, the kind that had been printed on cheap paper years ago. It showed a man standing on the porch of the cabin, smiling stiffly. He was wearing the same jacket I was wearing now, my own, and holding a camera identical to mine. I dropped it, like it burned. I don't remember standing up or backing away, only the sound of my own breathing rasping against the walls. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't listen. I stumbled into the kitchen, heart hammering, and that's when the floor creaked behind me. Soft, deliberate. I turned, light trembling across the hallway. Nothing there. Another creak. Closer. "Rick!" My voice cracked. Silence. Then, movement. The faintest shadow sliding along the edge of the hall, vanishing into the living room. I followed stupidly, every instinct screaming, but my mind lagging behind. I swept the light over the couch, the windows, the door, all locked. Then the beam landed on the fireplace. The ashes inside had been disturbed. Someone had drawn something through the soot. Not words, not symbols. Just a long smear, like the shape of a handprint dragging upward. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket, and I almost screamed. The screen flashed with a single text from Rick. "Don't go near the crawl space." Too late. Before I could type anything, the flashlight flickered, once, twice, and died. The phone light wasn't enough to see much, just pale reflections of the furniture. But I heard it then. The sound of breathing again, not behind a wall this time, in the same room. I stood completely still. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Who's there?" Nothing. The air shifted, that subtle displacement when someone moves nearby. Then a faint rasp of fabric brushing wood. I turned toward it, raising the light, and for a fraction of a second, the beam caught something. A face, pale and slack, eyes glinting like glass marbles in the dark corner by the doorway. And then it moved. I ran. I don't remember opening the door, only that the night hit me hard, cold air cutting my lungs as I sprinted toward the car. I didn't look back. The forest swallowed the cabin whole behind me. When I reached the main road, I drove until sunrise. No music, no stops, no thought, just the sound of rain against the windshield and my own heartbeat trying to escape my chest. By the time I got to the next town, my phone had service again. 3 missed calls from Rick, 1 voicemail. I pressed play. "Ethan, it's Rick. Listen, the guy who rented before you, his name was Owen. He wasn't supposed to stay that long. Sheriff found his truck near the trailhead 2 months ago, but they never found him. We thought maybe he just walked off. I don't know what you saw, but..." The message ended there. I sat in the car for a long time, parked outside a diner that hadn't opened yet. Sunlight was just starting to hit the snowcaps in the distance. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then I looked at the passenger seat. There, coiled neatly, was the phone charger ID left on the nightstand that first night. The identical one that shouldn't have been mine. It wasn't wet, it wasn't dirty, it looked freshly used. It's been 3 weeks since then. I haven't been able to work. Every time I lift my camera, I see that photo, the man on the porch, wearing my jacket, holding my camera, smiling like he already knew how the story ended. Sometimes when I plug in my phone at night, the screen lights up for no reason, and a photo flashes for just a second before it disappears. It's always the same one, a blurry shot of me, asleep in that cabin. I never took it, and I still don't know who did. If this story made you stop and think, maybe it wasn't just a story. Every photo, every sound, every small detail, it all came from something real. And sometimes reality is much darker than fiction. If you felt that chill, leave a like to help more people find it. Comment below what you think really happened in that cabin, or if you've ever experienced something you still can't explain. Subscribe to Mr. Ebon for more true-style horror stories. Quiet places, strange people, and those moments when you realize someone might still be there. Share this story with someone who loves realistic horror. You never know who might relate or who might remember something they've tried to forget.